Hello and welcome to Nutrition Unfiltered, a podcast where science meets sass. I am Christy Maloney, registered dietitian and eating disorder specialist. This is a place where we talk nutrition, ask the hard questions, and have some fun along the way. I'm so glad you're here. All right, so welcome to the first episode of Nutrition Unfiltered. I'm very excited to roll this out. I'm hoping to use this as a creative outlet for myself and as a way to educate other people about intuitive eating, disordered relationship with food, body image, all the things that we talk about in the anti-diet space. So first up, I have Michelle Brotherton joining me today to talk more about intuitive eating. Michelle, do you want to give us a brief bio and overview of yourself?
Sure. So I'm so excited to be here. I'm a registered dietitian that works at Enhanced Nutrition Associates in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I focus on helping people quit dieting and start to listen to their bodies to reach a health promoting place with their nutrition, movement. And as dietitians, I feel like we all have some history with disordered eating and falling into fad dieting ourselves. So that's really what got me into the intuitive eating world, is really working on my own relationship with food and movement to really clear my headspace and not be so stressed out about food all the time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that so many of us, me personally, I'll speak for myself, but when I went back to school to be a dietitian, it was about, I want to figure out a way to live in my disorder and it be socially acceptable. And then you kind of fall into the intuitive eating, anti-diet, weight neutral space. And it's like, oh, there's this whole other way to view food that's pretty incredible.
Yes, and so freeing. And yeah, your story is so similar to, I think, a lot of nutrition professionals that diet and stay in their disorder in the name of health, like using quotations very loosely, like health, but it's really just to make ourselves feel better being disordered.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we'll use that to segue into our topic today, is talking about the 10 principles of intuitive eating, talking about how diet culture can co-opt those things, some misconceptions with those principles, and like, how do we apply those in really productive, healthy ways? I think the first thing to maybe define is diet culture. So that's kind of like buzzwordy these days. We hear all about it. Diet culture is bad. Diet culture, we hear a lot of negativity about it. If in your mind, how would you define diet culture so people have a really great understanding of what that means?
I would define diet culture as being like a restrictive fad diet way of eating to reach a arbitrary health goal. So basically to force your body to shrink down normally, but it can also mean trying to get like shredded, for example. But when I think of diet culture, I instantly think of pseudoscience. So basically, it's not going to be evidence-based ways to actually improve your health. They usually involve a gimmick of some kind. But yeah, I would love to hear how you would define diet culture, because it's a very broad topic.
Yeah, I agree with you. Anything that's very gimmicky, I think, and right now on January 2nd, we're in like the heyday of diet culture of new year, new you, start whatever diet, insert fill in the blank right now. Yeah, I view diet culture kind of how I would define it succinctly is people that are opting into a fad diet for a weight loss or aesthetic goal. And I love that you use the word arbitrary because I agree with that. That is heavily focused on external locus of control, so rules and numbers, versus internal locus of control. So how you feel, your energy, your sleep, your mental status, like those kinds of things. That's how I view it. And so when we talk about intuitive eating, it's really connecting with that internal locus of control. So we'll go through the 10 principles and talk a little bit about each one. So principle 1, and for any of you that don't know what the intuitive eating is, I guess it's a great place to start to say intuitive eating is a book written by two dietitians, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, and they really defined a healthy relationship with food in these 10 principles. I think we're on the 4th edition of that, so it's kind of morphed and changed along the way as we've learned more and, thoughts around intuitive eating have evolved, but this is where we're at now. So number 1, reject the diet mentality. Michelle, what say you about that?
This is arguably the hardest principle in my
Mhm.
opinion,
Yep.
because it is letting go of the idea that diets work in the first place. So it's basically just getting into your head that diets really don't work long term for the majority of people. And the whole dieting mentality is kind of that mentality that, like, all right, today I'm going to have my last supper and then my diet starts tomorrow. I have to be
Mhm.
good tomorrow. I have to eat clean tomorrow. It's kind of that mentality that, especially in the US, we have adopted as being gospel that diets work. So that's kind of my perception of just rejecting that whole mentality and kind of being the black sheep of the nutrition space. So,
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think this is the hardest one to accept because anytime, and I know in my work, in my personal life, when I say, that diets don't work, it's sort of like people gasp, like, "Oh my
Mhm.
God, you're a dietitian and you're saying this?" And I agree. It's because we have been fed this, pardon the pun, for the longest that, the way to be healthy is to diet. I know I was born in 1981, so growing up in the 80s and then into the 90s, 90s is when dieting especially became prevalent in the midst of like the low fat era. So my conception of relationship with food was really born of you need to be counting calories or fat grams or that kind of thing. And I think that it took me a lot of work to mentally separate from that. It really, really did. And I think that a lot of people also are in that same space. I know, especially, people my age, a little bit older, a little bit younger. I will say the thing that I'm very excited about is it seems like my Gen Z clients are letting go a little bit of that more
Yep.
than I was able to at their age as an elder millennial. What do you think? What did you observe of that as a child?
Oh, that's such a great thought because I was just thinking that even though we are from, slightly different like I hate saying
Mhm.
time periods, but I'm like a mid millennial, like
Yeah.
whatever. I was right on the cusp of like millennial Gen Z.
Mhm.
And we grew up in the early 2000s with like being super thin, being in heroin chic, if you will,
Mm.
low rise jeans that were about to show your butt and not flattering on any body type, and just feeling
Terrible.
like, oh, awful,
Mhm.
awful. And I think that for me growing up, I just I'm not like a stick leg type person, and just being
Mhm.
really uncomfortable with my body growing up in that space because it didn't fit the norm of what was beautiful, the ideal, etc. And that really carried with me as I grew up. And it took a lot of time to unbrainwash myself that, like, just because my body doesn't fit the ideal doesn't mean it's wrong. And no matter what generation you're in, I think we've all had to deal with stereotypes and understanding how our bodies fit into that space when we're constantly being told that we're wrong for how we look. And in terms of Gen Z, I totally agree. Like, I've seen that with my clients too, that like they just have this uncaring attitude a lot of the time of like, F your beauty standards type
Mhm.
mentality. And I love it. It's also kind of mischievous though, because instead of being like traditional diet culture, it's morphed into this like clean eating wellness space that is kind of like diet culture rebranded almost in a way. I don't know if you've seen that with your clients.
Oh yeah, the whole wellness culture. And we're doing this in the name of health and wellness, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but I do believe it is diet culture on some levels rebranded for sure. And going back to the early 2000s, I promised that this podcast would be sassy and sweary. So it was a shit show, right? It was a shit
Yes.
show because we're thinking about Victoria's Secret models. We're thinking about the super low rise jeans. We're thinking about like heroin chic kind of coming from the 90s into that space. I saw something on Instagram the other day that was about like the Bridget Jones Diary. I don't know if
Oh
you
my
remember that
gosh.
movie,
Yes.
but where she was writing in her journal, I think it was that she weighed 136 pounds and she was, conceptually, she was, I'm so fat, I'm not okay. And it's just like, that's an awful thing to be teaching people. One, because any point, any size is fine, but especially kind of in that space and taking a weight that is actually a healthy weight and saying that it is a not okay weight. That just, I don't know. I saw that and it really stuck out to me.
Oh, okay. So this movie, changed my life for the better when I saw it when I was younger. I was obsessed with this movie because the end is really powerful, I think. Like,
Mm-hmm.
she just doesn't need a man, basically. But also her family's focus, her friends' focus on how her body looks, and just this constant focus on this poor woman's normal body, and the chain smoking that goes along with it. Like, it's the whole era is very telling. And today it probably wouldn't be accepted as like whatever, but it was good for the time. And I think a lot of people struggled with that, with feeling like, their very normal bodies just weren't good enough for society at that time.
Yes, absolutely. Agreed. All right. So we'll move to number 2, honor your hunger. So, second principle of intuitive eating is honor your hunger. How would you define that?
I mean, simplistically, I think it's just allowing yourself to eat enough for your needs. So, not what diet culture says, but actually eating enough calories, enough nourishment in the day, protein, carbs, and fat. And when you get a hunger cue, you eat, which sounds really like, no shit. Like, when you get hungry, you eat. But there's been so much drama around this. I feel like, with like, oh, if you feel a hunger cue, you're just thirsty, just drink a glass of water, or you can go a little bit longer, just like try to fast until noon, etc. This is something that I think as a society we've really lost touch with, because we're kind of being told that our cues are wrong. So that's kind of how I would define that principle.
Yeah, I agree. I actually was just writing an Instagram post on things like that can affect your hunger and fullness, that have like, they throw off your internal cues, and the whole let's drink water if we're hungry to see if we're really thirsty is such an old diet culture rule. It's really frustrating. I will say that I agree with you. Honoring your hunger meaning that internal locus of control. So I'm going to look at what my body is telling me that it needs. Um do I want a cheeseburger and fries today, or do I really want a giant salad? Or do I want some candy, or do I want some fruit, right? Like, those things are going to balance out and kind of bounce around a little bit. But ultimately, honoring your hunger is listening to, what your body's telling you it wants, and eating with enough adequacy. I have had, it was one Instagram post in particular where I had written something about honoring your hunger. And I got backlash by people saying, oh, well, then you just don't care about health if you're not
Mm-hmm.
eating with some sort of rule. And it was actually kind of stunning that saying honor your hunger, eat when you're hungry is in some ways not okay, or that we can't trust that in our bodies. I don't know, it was really, again, stunning to tell, and very telling about where we are as a culture in our relationship with food.
Absolutely. And I just think about like the perfect intuitive eater, which is a baby or toddlers,
Yes.
and how when they get hungry, they don't look at the time on the clock. They aren't thinking, oh, well, I just ate 2 hours ago. They're saying, Mom, I'm hungry. Can I have a
Yep.
snack? And I'm just always wondering, where does this change from being appropriate to not being appropriate? Like, why is that not appropriate for a grown adult that has way better judgment than a toddler to start ignoring their cues because it's perceived as wrong to eat every 2 hours, or maybe only eat 3 times in the day, or eat maybe 8 small mini meals that day if that feels right to you? It's just really interesting about how we're kind of taught nowadays to not trust our cues that are happening. We should all just eat like, toddlers, is my opinion.
I love that. And I think you're right. Even having like watched my daughter grow up, as an intuitive eating dietitian, I've tried to be very careful about the messaging she receives about food and body and hunger and fullness, but it happens early. It happens very, very, very early. And I feel like that is a huge topic for another day, because we can go down that rabbit hole big time. But I think you're right. We are, for the most part, born intuitive eaters, and society really, really takes us away from that. All right, number 3, make peace with food. How would you define that?
So that's a big one, because it's kind of putting all foods on a neutral playing field so that you're not demonizing any one food. And on the flip side of that, not putting any one food up on a pedestal, but it's kind of bringing a neutral approach so that you're not at war with food anymore. So that's kind of how I would define that one.
Yeah, that's a really great one. Food neutrality. Kind of in summation, for sure, food neutrality. All foods fit. All the anti-diet things, right?
Yes, which is like so much easier said than done.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. This is the one that I know people, my clients, I see that, you can reject the diet mentality and say, yes, I see that as the bullshit that it is, but it's the turning it inward and saying like, oh shit, now I like actually have to like walk the walk and let go of all of this stuff and let go of all these preconceived notions about food. And it's hard. It's really hard.
Yes, it's like, oh, I'm supposed to eat a pizza and not shame myself afterwards. How
Mm-hmm.
do I do that? And
Yes.
it's so different when it's in practice because your brain has kind of been wired in a way to demonize certain foods, just from what society has told us is like good or bad, or even other, nutrition professionals or your doctor has
Mm-hmm.
said this food is good, this food is bad. And it takes a lot of effort and mental, not gymnastics, but like reasoning with yourself to get out of this dogma. And I try to get people to think about it like there's not any good or bad food, but there probably will be maybe a good choice for you in that moment that works
Mm-hmm.
better for you than another choice. And like you said earlier, sometimes it will be salad. Other times it might be pizza. Other times it might be a donut. We just have to see what happens.
I love that. Yes, we'll just see what happens. TBD. All right, number 4, challenging the food police. And so in the book, they give a bunch of examples of, what the food police can sound like and, what the different voices are, but just sort of like in a zoom out view. How would you just define that, challenging the food police?
Yeah, the food police is anybody that judges your food choices. And sometimes you might be the biggest food police to yourself. It can also be a doctor. It can also be, a loved one, like a parent might be judging you. So it's really like you having the confidence in your food choices, like so solidly that you can start to challenge when other people question you or try to get you to fall back into diet culture.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one that it might take some time for you to work through the other principles first and get like a solid foundation of intuitive eating before you're even able to challenge the food police. But yeah, like, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, when I hear people kind of talk about what has informed that inner food police, right? Because you're right, there are the external food polices. There are many. But when you're thinking also about the internal food police, a lot of times that has been informed by what somebody's, and I don't want to hate on the moms, but a lot of times it's like, well, my mom, said
Mhm.
this about my food or my body, that kind of thing. But now I think we're seeing that internal food police voice being informed by, Instagram and TikTok and whatever the youths are looking at these days. It creates so many rules that are just reinforced that it's hard to know what's okay and what's not okay. And it becomes like that internal food police voice.
Yes, and it is really hard to challenge, but it does get easier the more that you do it. And I think that that is so true about social media being the ultimate food police right now, in a way, because what gets hit is what's controversial. And, you know, people's videos that blow up are more like, don't eat this food, don't eat that food because it's toxic. And that is the epitome of the food police. And it's usually not based in evidence. So yeah, we could all do better if we tried to challenge that voice wherever it's coming from a little bit more.
Oh yeah, because social media, you you get followers, you get likes, you get views, like whatever it is you're going for, by being somewhat controversial. And so if somebody is posting something like that, you said like, don't eat this. And I see a lot of people like, don't eat this. Sugar is poison. Or if you eat this, it's I can't even remember the one, but it's like it's what is it? Glyphosate, whatever that is. Anyway, it's like it will literally kill you, and it's like, well, the dose makes the toxin, and like let's look at this and with a critical eye. Anyway,
Yes.
lots of thoughts on that. What is the proper pronunciation of that word?
You know, who the hell knows? I think it's
Who the hell
glyphosate.
cares, right?
Yeah, literally. You can eat
Yeah,
it. So it's
right.
not a toxin. Like, it's fine.
Like we're good. We're fine. Things are fine. Yep. Okay. I know it's one of those words when I see it in print, when I see it in print, I know what it is, but then
Yes.
I don't think I've ever actually said the word like in my head. But anyway. All right. Principle number 5, feel your fullness.
Yes. Okay. So this is uncomfortable for a lot of people to feel full and be okay with it when they are used to a history of restriction. Or if they've kind of been swinging from being very, very hungry to feeling overly full where it's not comfortable. So, feeling your fullness is all about finding that kind of place in the middle where you're able to nourish yourself properly and feel satisfied and maybe a little bit full, like not over satisfaction. It's normal to feel full after a meal and have it not trigger a stress response is how I start to see that. But how would you define that principle?
Yeah, I love that. Like where you feel your fullness and you feel adequately satiated without a stress response. I think that's such a great way to say it. I think that, feeling your fullness, I agree. When somebody's coming from a history of dieting, that again is coming from a place of external locus of control. So, an example of that is I've met my calories for the day, I can't have any more. I've met my points for the day, I can't have any more. If I eat something else, it's going to throw my macros out of balance. Like whatever thing, whatever modality of diet culture or dieting you've been engaging in, that's the control. That's how you know when you've had enough. So feeling your fullness is turning that inward. It's that internal locus of control. And a lot of times people are so disconnected with that because if you've had years or decades of dieting, you don't know what that feels like. When we're working through that with a client, we do a lot of work around the hunger fullness scale and beginning to identify somatically like what does actual comfortable fullness feel like in your body and kind of going from there. And knowing that throughout this process, there's going to be some times where you overshoot. You might have a few times where you're like, gosh, I'm really uncomfortably full. And that is part of the process of finding what works for you. And I think people are really scared of that, especially people that have been shooting for weight goals or shooting for an aesthetic or are really fearful of weight changes, that knowing there's going to be sometimes that overshoot is a hard one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes time to actually accept that that is like the healthy thing for your body right now,
Mhm.
even if it does overshoot, which, makes me think of the next principle, cope with your emotions with kindness. Because when you are quitting dieting and starting to learn your cues, a lot of emotions can come up for people
Mhm.
where there might be anger that they've been sold a lie that is dieting and the diet industry, $1 billion industry per year that is based off of something that doesn't work for a lot of people. If they are using food as some sort of coping mechanism, which I think we all do to some capacity, it's normal to eat when you're happy. It's normal to eat
Mhm.
sometimes when you're sad. And it's kind of figuring out, okay, if you're using food as kind of an unhealthy coping mechanism because you can't deal with these other feelings going on, how do we deal with your emotions from like a kind and compassionate place? So this is another one that, like, I don't think we touched on this yet, but like if you're working on your diet history and a history of restriction, you should also be working with a therapist because it brings up a lot of emotions that you don't even know are under the surface until you get to them.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, food, like you were saying, a lot of times is used to cope, used to numb out, used to kind of soften the edges of tough emotions. And if somebody's been doing that for a long time, again, we're talking for some people decades of dieting, and you take away that coping skill, stuff's going to bubble up. And yeah, for sure, working with a trained therapist is critical in being able to move through this process, because we as dietitians, we can talk about the emotions about food, but when it comes up into the underlying that kind of stuff, for sure, working with a mental health therapist is so critical. And I think kind of along the lines of what you're saying, giving yourself some grace and knowing that it's an imperfect process. People, I think, start this process a lot of times feeling really hopeful that it's going to transform their relationship with food. And I 100% believe that it will. but it is an imperfect process and things are going to bubble up and it's going to feel shitty at times. And you're going to ask yourself, why the hell am I doing this? I felt so much better when I was numbing out. But on the other side of that is peace, is liberation, is freedom. I think freedom was the word you used earlier. And I think it's a really great word for the end of this process.
Yeah, absolutely. And letting go of that control aspect is so frightening. And it takes a lot to trust in the process. But I usually tell people that, like, if you're stuck in diet culture, you're not in control though either. So it's like a false sense of control in a way. So why not dive into IE, which actually gives you the power back eventually, even if it takes a bumpy road to get there or time.
Absolutely. Going off-roading a little bit, but it's worth the journey. All right, number 7, respect your body. This, I think, is my favorite out of all of them. I love this one. How would you define that one?
Respecting your body is huge. It's basically that, okay, if you're coming into intuitive eating and you want to lose weight, let's say, or you don't like your body, you hate your body, the respecting your body is just saying that even if you want to change your body or don't like it, you need to still respect it. It still deserves nourishment frequently throughout the day. It still deserves that you are treating it appropriately, even if you don't love it right now. So it's kind of just saying that, like, no matter where you are in your journey, your body does need respect to get through this process. And it's also really about respecting and accepting genetics and how much genetics are at play when it comes to how your body wants to be. So it's kind of a really big one for people to get on board with. But once you do, your mental health will be so much improved. But what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I really kind of view it as showing yourself mental and physical respect. So for me, physical respect is I'm going to eat adequately. I'm going to give myself proper sleep. I'm going to get some movement, which is the next principle we'll talk about more. I'm going to go to the doctor. I'm going to go to the dentist. I'm going to do all the things to really take care of my body, even if I don't love it. And you brought up that point, which I think is really great. You don't have to love your body to respect it. There are people in your life, I'm sure, that you respect that you don't really like. And so you can be in that relationship with your body as you move toward a place of acceptance and maybe even liking your body at some point. Yeah, I think that when you think about that, that's the aspects of physical respect. When you think about mental respect, it is really working on that negative internal dialogue. So if you catch yourself saying, I look fat or I look ugly or I shouldn't wear this or this isn't okay or whatever disparaging comment you're making, I mean, that's a process of change over time. That's not a like you catch it once and it goes away. I always tell clients, you can't control your thoughts, but it's up to you what you do with them. And that we know with the concept of neuroplasticity and helping to like rewire your brain to think more positive, more adaptive thoughts, if we can work on that mental respecting yourself too, that goes a long way toward getting yourself to give your body the physical respect that it needs.
Absolutely. You can't respect your body physically unless you work on the mental piece, because that's where it all starts.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are restricting food or have a strained relationship with food, or let's say you've reached your quote unquote like goal weight through restriction, that is not respecting your body, even if you are technically in a healthy BMI, which is also something that, it's shocking to a lot of people when they get praise for changing their body or weight loss, when that is not even true respect, depending on how you got to that point.
I'll never forget doing 23andMe for the first time. And my genetics are primarily German. And so if for anybody that's ever done 23andMe, there's a part where it's like, what is your projected BMI? And so we both know that BMI is bullshit, but for the average person that doesn't know that, and for even me at first, when I saw it, said, you are probably going to be in the overweight to obese BMI category based on my genetics. And my first response was, fuck these German genetics, you know? But then it's
Yes.
like, okay, it's where my body's going to be, and I can fight it or I can accept it. And accepting it's not an easy process, but ultimately fighting it felt like shit too, you know? So
Mhm.
it's like, which way are we going to go? And I know that if I fight it, I'm always going to feel like shit. But if I accept it, I have a chance of not feeling that way. So, you know, which path am I going to take? But it's hard. It's hard.
Absolutely.
All right, 9, movement. Feel the difference.
Okay, so when I first went through intuitive eating and reading all the principles and I did the workbook, the movement one was really triggering for me because
Mm,
as someone with a lot of anxiety and classic type A perfectionistic tendencies that, you know, EDs love to thrive on, movement was my outlet. And it was hard for me to accept that exercise can be an unhealthy coping mechanism if you let it. And when I learned about joyful movement, which is essentially you are doing what feels good to your body on that day, and it's not the rigid exercise routine that we are taught is like healthy for us. So it's finding what you like, and it will be flexible and intuitive and fun, and it won't really feel like exercise so much. That was a hard one for me because I realized I wasn't resting enough. I wasn't even enjoying what I was doing
mhm.
anymore. And it wasn't health promoting for me in the long run. So I think that joyful movement is something that's so unique to the individual that they really have to do some trial and error to figure out what works for them. And what makes it even more complicated is that it changes throughout our lives. Because what worked for you a year ago might not be where what works for you now. And like, that's okay. So, yeah, joyful movement is a really great one to adopt, and it is health promoting in the long run, but it just takes some really like trial and error and intrinsic deep thoughts to figure out, do I even like running? Do I even like Pilates that I'm making myself go to 3 times a week for what? And I hate it.
Mhm.
It's kind of like really hard to, you know, think about that in a way that is actually like mentally healthy because we're just told that exercise in all capacities is great for us. So, yeah, like what do you think about that one?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I know my own relationship with exercise started as very militant and prescribed. There's the word. It's Monday, so you do this strength workout and you do this kind of cardio, and it's Tuesday and you do this thing and this thing, and you do it Monday through Saturday. And if you take a day off, I mean, my internal thoughts were you're lazy, you're not committed, you're not doing enough, you should eat less, you know, like it's all of these things. And it's so unhealthy, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think at any point, anybody in the outside world in our diet culture would have looked and said, wow, look at that commitment and look at that willpower, whatever the word might be. But it was so unhealthy. It was so unhealthy. And to have a healthy relationship with movement, and I think it's really important to point out, you know, the use of the word movement versus exercise is very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Exercise has such a connotation to it that it has to be X amount of time on the treadmill, or, you know, I do back and biceps on Thursday, like whatever, you know, it's very prescriptive versus very intuitive. And like you were saying, you know, that the goal of movement, the goal of intuitive movement would be I wake up and I say, wow, yeah, man, it's beautiful weather. A run sounds amazing today. Or you wake up and it's kind of a shitty day outside and you're like, yeah, man, I'm feeling some yoga. That sounds really great. But it's fluid and it's flexible and it's based on how you're feeling in any given moment. And like you said, it's so important what you enjoy. Some people love running on the treadmill and that's cool. And for some people, it's extremely triggering because that's part of their disordered history, and it's okay to avoid it. It's so individual.
Yeah, absolutely. But once you figure out what you actually like, this is why joyful movement is so important, is that it will keep you moving lifelong until
Mhm.
you don't want to anymore or can't. But I always tell people, like, sure, you can run 5 miles a day right now, but what happens when you get an injury or you start to, you know, naturally get older and your joints won't have that anymore? Then what do you do? So let me just tell you real quick. This is when I knew I had messed up relationship with exercise was when I had strep throat and I made myself like go run every day. And I'm like, maybe something's not right here. And I was like
Yeah.
19 and, I was praised for my dedication,
Oh my gosh. Yes.
and it's just like how much of these disordered habits are praised by society. And again, like I don't trust society's perception of health anymore because of how much I was praised for things that weren't good for my health.
Yeah. You're so disciplined. I can't believe you're so disciplined, right? Like, I mean, that's the thing we hear over and over, and it's nuts. But you're right. Society is really reinforcing of disordered habits. And I love that now you can look back and say, I had strep throat. Like, I needed to be in bed, drinking some tea, like doing
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, literally, what was I thinking?
Mm-hmm.
But it's nice to reflect back and be like, wow, this is how far you can come, if you start to work on these things, and everyone's journey will look so different. But I promise, people will be happier in the end once they work on these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that brings us to principle number 10. So, honor your health with gentle nutrition. And I always describe this to clients as the culmination of all of these things, right? Like it's putting together principles 1 through 9 and then factoring in any health concerns that we might need to focus on with nutrition and movement. So, just putting it all together, how would you describe principle 10?
So, principle 10 is, I would describe it as a non-stressful way to eat in a way that aligns with nutrition science.
Right.
So, as dietitians, when we first talk about intuitive eating, it's really confusing for people because they think it's just not caring about what you eat anymore. It's not caring about nutrition for health. And gentle nutrition is eating in a way that supports your health long term. It's very based in nutrition science and nutrition adequacy. And it's just hard to get to a place of gentle nutrition if you don't accept all of the other principles first. Like it's very intentional to go stepwise through the principles. Because if you just are starting your intuitive eating journey and you just skip to gentle nutrition, you might see it as just another diet when it's
Yeah.
really a lifelong way of eating that is non-restrictive, but also health promoting, which is like the unicorn and, nutrition.
The unicorn exists. It's there. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I always tell people in this part too, and I think you're right, that if you skip to number 10, it does feel like another diet. And so many times, and this kind of comes to one of the things, that we're going to talk about is, how is diet culture co-opted intuitive eating? And I think like this is the one, right? When somebody's like, oh, I want to like listen to my body, but also like, how do I make it prescriptive? Because then it feels very sort of safe. With anybody that I work with disordered eating and eating disorders, and we say like, okay, we're going to work on 1 through 9 first, and we're going to work on the intuition first. A lot of times we do hear like, oh, you don't like care about health. And I always tell people like your biggest health threat is your disordered eating. And then, hopefully not eating disorder, but if there's that involved too, like that's your biggest health threat because it's the one that keeps you going, yo-yoing and dieting and not dieting and binging and over exercising or not exercising at all. Like that's the thing. So if we can get through that, then we can put it all together like this. And that, for people that are anti-diet or intuitive eating dietitians, we're not anti-health, and I think that's a very important distinction to make. There are people with diabetes that need to eat for that. There are people with PCOS, myself included, that need to eat for that. There are people with high cholesterol that we need to work on that too. And we want to focus on that, but it's from a weight neutral perspective. What do you say about that? And how would you define weight neutrality for anybody who doesn't know what that means?
So weight neutrality is being okay with your body and accepting that this is where your body is right now in this moment. And you don't love it, but you respect it. So it's going back to that body respect principle of intuitive eating. And I see weight neutrality and weight neutrality on a spectrum, like a lot of things are on a spectrum in nutrition. Nothing in nutrition is black and white, nothing.
Nothing.
So you have body negativity on one end where you might be really dissatisfied with your body. And then you have body positivity on the other end. So I just like think of someone like Lizzo, that loves their body and is really open about it, which is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a perfect world, would I want everyone to be body positive? Absolutely, but it's not realistic to jump from a place of hate to love. So the place in the middle is neutrality, where you start to accept your body where it is. And it's kind of like a stepping stone before you can get into loving yourself. So that's kind of how I would define body neutrality.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people you don't have to like love your stomach, but neutrality for that would be I have a stomach and it holds my intestines and it digests food. And I'm grateful that I can take in nutrients from that versus like, oh, I hate my jiggly stomach or like whatever the thing is. That's kind of the way I put words to it. And I agree. It's such a spectrum. And I don't think nobody lives in body positivity all the time. And I think that a lot of times, especially in the space of people trying to heal their relationship with food and body, if they have a negative thought about their body, it's like, oh man, I'm not there yet. I haven't arrived. Like, where's the unicorn? But we all have thoughts like that on time to time. But you're right. If we're trending toward that spectrum that you described, so body neutrality to body positivity, if we're landing in that space most of the time, sweet, we're there.
Absolutely. And like, no matter how long you've been working on your relationship with food, body acceptance, joyful movement, everyone has shitty days. Like, you can't control them or prevent them completely. But I think what you said earlier was so true, that it's like more about how you respond to them. And if you have a negative body image thought that comes in, for example, if you go try on clothes and it's triggering for you, it's a matter of, okay, is that triggering thought going to affect you the rest of the day where you have to cancel plans? Or is it a thought that lasts for 2 or 3 minutes and you're able to move on? That is the goal. And it's not going to be a place of perfection, but really just getting to a place where you're not letting negative thoughts of food and body image disrupt your life and interfere with your whole day.
Absolutely. And can we just say, like, fuck fluorescent lighting?
Literally, though.
Like,
yes.
But why? Why do we do this? Yes, that has ruined many a day for people, I'm certain. But you're right. If we can put a time frame on it of like, all right, 2 or 3 minutes, like, I'm going to find something I do like and get the hell out of here. Sweet. That's awesome.
Yep.
All right. So I want to hear your top 3 tips to move from dieting to intuitive eating. What do you think?
My top 3 tips to move away from dieting into intuitive eating is, my number one thing is you probably need to start with some structure in intuitive eating. So what that means is, if you're coming from a history of just like fad diet from fad diet, you don't know like how your hunger cues actually are. You're just kind of like in a place of chaos with your eating. You probably will need some structure to realign your hunger and fullness cues, and also teach you an appropriate minimum amount that you should be hitting every single day. So if you work with a registered dietitian, like often I use exchange-based meal plans, different plate approaches, so that we can get you to a place of like eating a minimum amount that's adequate per day. And it gives you like kind of a template to go off of before we set you loose. And this is really beneficial so that you, number one, feel like more confident in this whole process. It gives you kind of like a guidepost, and you start to feel your hunger and fullness cues in a kind of safe environment, a safe way. So that would be my first one, is you might need to start with a little bit of structure as like training wheels before you dive into just IE. My second thing would be to throw away your scale, because you will not get any benefit from weighing yourself throughout this process. Different things can happen with your weight, and you need to let them happen. And that will look different for everybody dependent on their history. But I do want to say that if your body does change, it needed to change. And you need to kind of let that happen. So, my third thing would be to move through the principles in a stepwise fashion and not just focus on healthy eating right off the bat. And the reason why I recommend moving through in a stepwise fashion and just like letting your body do what it needs to through the IE process is because when you have a history of restriction of any kind, your body might want to go through a period of overcompensation. So you have restriction on one end, overcompensation on the other end. So when you first come off of dieting or restriction, you are not going to crave chicken breasts. You're probably going to crave cookies, maybe your trigger foods or fear foods that you've restricted for a while. That will look different for everybody, but typically you might crave some higher sugar, higher fat foods at the get-go, and that's okay, because you have to let yourself swing into that period of overcompensation before you land in the middle, which is like balanced eating. So it's a lot less scary to have that period of overcompensation though, when you have kind of a structure in place. So you won't just be doing it on your own. And I would just like end this with, if you are coming from a place of really heavy restriction, or you're not quite sure how to eat, or it's really fearful for you to go through this process, that's when you would work with a dietitian. So let us do the heavy lifting for you and help you through this process. And it will be ever changing as your journey continues.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Those are all great, great, great tips for that. And I think you're right. It's ever changing. I don't think anybody in their intuitive eating journey is ever fully through. Like it's constantly evolving, and that's such a great point. So when we asked for questions on Instagram, we got a few. So we'll take the last couple of minutes to go through this. The first one was, what do you do if you find yourself slipping into overeating while trying this? And I think you pretty succinctly answered that, as you're talking about like the pendulum swinging, and first you'll overshoot and then it'll kind of settle in the middle. And that's a natural part of the process, but also a really great reason to work with an intuitive eating dietitian to help you mentally navigate that, because that tends to be one of the tougher mental places. Number 2, does eating more carbs make you hungrier?
Oh, such a great question. So I would say they can. So I'd say yes and no, but let's talk about why. So eating carbs by themselves, and if you're eating more carbs than, let's say, your body might need in that day, it can cause a lot of blood sugar fluctuations that can make you hungrier. But I would say it's more like blood sugar dysregulation, appetite dysregulation. So they can, if you're not kind of dressing them up, if you're not pairing them with protein, fat, and fiber. So, but I also think that carbs can help make you less hungry, because usually they're your fiber rich foods. So I think as a part of a balanced day of eating, having enough carbs, which is usually way more than people think that they need, it's a minimum of like around 130 grams a day just for your brain to function alone. So, but eating enough carbs with your meals will have the opposite effect of keeping you full, because they are attached to those water molecules that kind of makes your gut actually feel full and stop that ghrelin, the hunger hormone, from being signaled. So I would say yes and no, but if you're kind of eating a balanced diet, they should help with hunger, not deter from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's the blood sugar fluctuations. And for anybody who's ever done the sad chicken breast and steamed broccoli diet, after at least a couple of days, you were like, where is a damn potato? Like, I need some bread, And so it's important to recognize that even if you feel like your appetite is a little bit down because you're not eating carbs because of some of the blood sugar stuff, that doesn't mean that it's right. Like, we should feel hungry. Hunger is like a natural human feeling, and we should feel that way. And I love that you pointed out the 130 grams of carbs. And I like to tell people, like, that's just, like you said, it's just for your brain. It doesn't even account for the fact that like you're going to probably get out of bed and walk around and expend energy doing other things. So that is the bare minimum. And I agree, when people are educated on how much carbohydrate they actually need, the response a lot of times is, oh my God, like, you're crazy. But it's true, right? Like, we need a significant amount. It's our body's preferred source of energy. So yeah, it should, for the most part, be the primary thing we're eating.
Yeah. And, carbs do so much for our metabolic function, our thyroid health, our metabolism needs, how efficient our bodies are at turning food into energy. So I usually tell people on low carb diets that, it might work for you for a short amount of time, but long term, your hormones, your body, your thyroid will just be very dysregulated. And carbs are actually our BFFs. Like, they just are. And you mentioned that, like, yes, if we're active throughout the day, we need more carbs. But I would also just like to say that if you are burning mental energy, you
Yes.
need more carbs. I remember when I would be taking like exams in college and I would not be hungry before because I'd be so stressed out. And then after an exam, I'd be like, oh my God, I just want like a pizza. Like I would be just so hungry.
Yes, I'm starving.
Yes. And that's because our brains can only run off of glucose molecules, which come from carbohydrates. So yeah, we need carbs.
And the other thing that I love about carbs, is they help our bodies produce serotonin. They're what allows our bodies to produce serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that make us feel happy. So literally, if you don't eat carbs, you're like not going to be happy.
Yep.
And we see that play out all the time.
All the time.
If you're on an SSRI, it's not going to be as effective if you don't eat carbohydrates because your body doesn't have enough serotonin to act on. So I'm just going to throw that out there as well.
Absolutely. There's a reason why carbohydrates should be around 60% of our calories at the minimum.
Absolutely. All right. And so the last one, I think this is fitting. Last question or thought here, detox. So it's the beginning of the new year and everyone is crazy about them. Is it worth it? What a great way to end this. I'll let you go first.
So my sister asked this question and I love her for it.
I love that.
So in a word, do detoxes work? Is it worth it? No. But let's talk about why. So our bodies have a natural detoxification system built in through our liver, kidneys, skin, and GI tract. The ironic thing about a lot of these detoxes is that they actually hinder our natural detoxability. So if we are eating a minimal amount on detoxes, which usually they are paired with a restrictive diet, not eating the amount that our body needs from protein, carbs, and fat, or taking supplements that can actually harm our liver and kidneys, we are deterring our detox abilities, not enhancing them. So a lot of these detoxes cost literally an arm and a leg, and your sanity.
And maybe your liver. I don't know.
And your liver. Yeah. So if you want to pay $4,000 for a month of Sakara, literally that's the price, to tell you to eat fruits and vegetables and take chlorophyll supplements, that is ultimately your choice as an adult. But come find us after you're done, please.
Right. Yeah. And odds are it's going to be way less than that to talk to an actual qualified professional. I think you summed it up pretty succinctly. So what I'm hearing is that you want to eat in ways that are going to support liver, GI, skin, kidneys, all of those things. So if you had to sum that up, what would that look like?
So that would be eating, if I had to sum that up, I'm thinking in tiers, right? I think number one, you need to be eating enough calories per day. Number two, you need to be eating frequently enough through the day. So every 3 to 5 hours. Number three, are you getting enough protein, carbs, fat, all of the basic macronutrients that our bodies need to thrive? Number four, are you getting enough fruits and vegetables and micronutrients throughout the day, including fiber? And then number five, are there any other gaps that we need to fill? Like if you have a special need for enough iron, B12, or something else going on that we need to pay attention to. Doing all of these things will help support your body's natural way of utilizing energy, detoxing, getting rid of bowel movements and urine how it's supposed to. And you won't have the need to do an exogenous detox like this. So summing it up, that's how I would work through things stepwise.
Love that. And I'll just add, drink your water.
Yes. Not just coffee.
Hydration.
Yes.
Right. We love coffee, but we love water.
Yes.
All right. So we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining me today. I feel like this has been a very fun, informative conversation, and hopefully others will find it that way as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me today on Nutrition Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with others that might enjoy it as well. You can follow me on Instagram at eatingdisordered.dietitian. Thanks for getting sassy with me.